Joining us today is Adrian Gheorghe of the Global Health Development Group at GIDA to speak with us about his research on the West African Ebola epidemic that happened in 2014 to 2016 and the financial response. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
What can we learn from the financial response during these outbreaks?
Well, the Ebola epidemic in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone over 2014-16 was carefully studied, and a few lessons emerged in terms of the way the response was financed. One of these lessons refers to the difficulty of knowing with precision in the early phases of the epidemic how much money you'll actually need to respond. In that case, the estimates for a core emergency response over the following 6 to 9 months, delivered by the United Nations entities alone, varied from around $5 million in April 2014 to $70 million in July 2014 to $490 million in August, $1.5 billion in October, and $2.3 billion in January 2015. That's almost a 500-fold increase over the space of 9 months. And this happened just because the situation was assessed as things progressed to be more serious than originally thought.
Can you explain how this money was spent?
Well, finding the money turned out not to be the major challenge. If we examine the numbers, we can see that the amount of funding that was raised over time was not far behind what had been requested for the UN core emergency response. Actually, by January 2015, more than $5 billion had been raised for the entire Ebola response, but some of it went to other channels, for example, in direct bilateral assistance to the governments of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So finding the money was not that much of an issue, but getting the money to the front lines in good time and making sure that it was spent well, for example, to avoid duplication or fraud, proved to be a bigger challenge. And a concrete example pertains to how funds were transferred. They were transferred across countries and within countries using mechanisms and procedures that had simply not been designed to ensure a rapid disbursement or spending of such large volumes of funds so quickly in a coordinated manner. And evaluations of the financing response conducted, for example, by the World Bank found ample evidence of insufficient coordination, clarity, and accountability in the way funds were spent. Also, another point to make here is that most of the funding went for response and very little went for preparedness. More specifically, funding for preparing the health systems in the affected countries to mitigate such crises in the future quickly waned after the crisis was over. And when we examine the volume that was spent, $6 billion spent on the total Ebola response is very little compared to over $50 billion, which was the estimate of the economic impact of the Ebola epidemic to the economies and societies in the region. It can be argued that some of this economic impact could have been prevented had these health systems been better equipped, better prepared in the first place to react to the crisis.
Are these lessons incorporated in preparations for future outbreaks?
Certainly, both national and international bodies have made significant progress in improving the rapidity, accountability, and efficiency of spending. And we can see that, for example, in how quickly funds were raised and dispersed to contain the Lassa fever epidemic in Nigeria in 2018. Still, experts agree that two major types of challenges remain in terms of preparing us for the next global outbreak. One of these challenges pertains to clarity and coordination. For example, there were few mechanisms to ensure rapid disbursement of funds at the time of the 2014-16 Ebola epidemic. Now there are many such schemes across several institutions. The World Bank alone has 7 or so such mechanisms, which raises the question of potentially complex and mixed signals, difficult to navigate international funding landscape, difficult to navigate by national governments. Another challenge pertains to underinvestment in preparedness. All this international funding that is now available would still go towards the acute response phase of an outbreak. And there are still little investments made in making sure that health systems are prepared to react in the first place. And this is the responsibility both of national governments and of the international community as a whole, to make sure that the right investments and the right incentives for investments are aligned to make sure that they actually happen. Free riding, hoping for the best, and relying on other countries' efforts towards preparedness will not go very far when the next global outbreak will hit us.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.